Welcome to Transparency with Diana B., a podcast from wealthmanagement.com focused on advisors' personal well-being and healing. In this podcast, we explore some of the deepest struggles and hardships that many advisors face and bring these issues out into the open so that others may find healing. Join us for this journey where we explore ways to overcome the stresses and anxieties as Diana draws from years of expertise and guest experts to manage the personal challenges of advisors.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Transparency with Diana B., a podcast by wealthmanagement.com. My name is Diana Britton, and I'm the managing editor of wealthmanagement.com. For those of you who are new to the podcast, each episode focuses on a personal development issue facing financial advisors and financial services professionals. Guests join me to talk about their journey dealing with the struggle and how they ultimately found healing. My guest today is Silvia Tergas, a financial planner with Prudential Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. Silvia, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having this space and this conversation. I appreciate it and happy to be here.
So Silvia is going to talk with us today about her experience as a female Latina in financial services, but also the challenges that she had to overcome in her journey to get where she is today. But Silvia, I want to go, sort of way back and start by talking about your father's journey when he was younger, because it seems like that really shaped your own path and your life experiences. And I know, your father grew up in Cuba and fled during the Castro Revolution. I just wondering, can you tell us a little bit about that? What happened, what was happening in the country, and how did your father get out?
Sure. So yeah, my father was born in Cuba, and you're definitely right that his really has shaped a lot in my life, and obviously was a foundation of our whole family story. And we'll get to that here. So yeah, my father was born in Cuba. He was the only son to his parents, my grandparents. They lived in Camagüey, which was one of the smaller cities, not in the capital. Rural and agriculture, basically sugarcane farming was big around there. So they were a very, very modest means, my father's family. And he, as the only child in this, in the small town, my grandparents and my father's, family being really of modest means and more in the sort of rural area of Cuba. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of education systems to say, and my father did talk about this. He wrote about this as well. So I know a little bit about it in some detail from him. So yeah, not a lot of sort of education systems, structure around education at a young age. But, they lived a happy life, certainly with with their own issues. But yeah, sort of simple like is what my father would say. He called himself a guajiro, which for those of us that know that term, it's basically like a country person, but more of just like simple in a very nice sort of life's essentials type of way. And so from there, really from one opportunity to the other, my father did end up going to private school for high school. This was now into the 50s in Cuba, so mid 50s. So this was the start at the time where there was already unrest around, yeah. Correct. Yeah. Unrest around Fidel Castro, the revolution. Certainly the current political environment wasn't great either, which, in some ways. So this was all really happening at that vital time for my dad, where he was going through high school, very dedicated to his studies, very dedicated. And he had in his line of sight to study at the University of Havana. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to study medicine. My father wrote about this, like I said, and mentioned it to us as well. So that was what he had his sights set on. Unfortunately, between his graduation was really when, things just sort of heated up from a standpoint of the communist revolution and Castro's influence. And there were strikes at the university, demonstrations. So, of course, Havana being the capital was at the center of a lot of this. It was just starting to not become safe. And the university was at the center of a lot of it. So that restricted his ability, not just his ability, but really sort of brought, progress and economic opportunity in those particular years. And, a lot of people's plans. I mean, certainly my father's story is not unique in that anyone that sort of had any plans around that time, as we know now, ended up sort of, going stage left a little bit. So that was just all extremely influential. My father spent about 2 to 3 years after graduating from high school, really without opportunity that he had in mind of what he would do, after being such a dedicated student and having this sort of path ahead of him that he wanted to pursue as far as medicine and going into the university for him and this family was, a tremendous undertaking. And so that was just really put on pause, and around the same time, he sort of came across, my father it's interesting that I'm doing this podcast, but my father loved radio. So he loved radio was kind of like the news of the time, right? And even later when we lived all over the world, he would just communicate. So anyhow, listening to radio and the news, he heard about an opportunity in Honduras, a school called El Zamorano, which is a well-known school in Honduras, mostly around agriculture and development. It's still there to this day. It's beautiful. It's a tremendous legacy. And the opportunity was to apply for scholarships to have students go and study in Honduras. And so my father considered it. It wasn't certainly something that he jumped into because, again, he didn't, he sort of was still hoping to pursue his, his dream of studying medicine and going to the Universidad de Havana. But he speaks about this opportunity, one that really got him out of Cuba. He saw it at the time as a way out. And my father left Cuba in April of 1959. So from a historical standpoint, I mean, this is really at the epicenter of turmoil and everything that was happening. And in fact, for a lot of people at that time, especially at his age, late teens, 18, 19, his parents and just anyone around that age was just being encouraged to, if they had an opportunity, if there was something that they could do outside of the country, to go ahead and do that. There was also pressure for him to either, declare, again, at that time, he could have gone through the, military, or a lot of pressure and influence around, are you part of the revolution? Are you not part of the revolution? Which side are you on, sort of thing, which my father clearly stated he wasn't, but also he just wasn't one to sort of, say, I'm on this side, I'm on this other side. He was on the countryside pretty much, and just opportunities for people. And that's what he focused on truly throughout his life. So he got the scholarship, which was great. Yeah, for sure. So he ended up, getting the scholarship. And even then, he needed to raise funds for the travel. They were going to pay for everything, pretty much room and board. But he needed to raise money for traveling. And so that was, an ordeal at the time that for my family, for his family. And he actually turned it down once, at one point he turned it down and actually got called from the school to just sort of urge him to reconsider and that he could always come back.
Yeah, so just to provide a little bit of background and history, the Cuban Revolution was an armed uprising in Cuba that overthrew the government of Fulgencio Bethesda on January 1st, 1959. So yeah, right during the time you're speaking about. The revolution's leader, Fidel Castro, went on to rule Cuba from 1959 to 2008. And so the years of unrest in the country were, characterized by sporadic raids, destruction of property, disruption to the Cuban economy. And the Cuban Revolution unleashed the largest refugee flow to the United States in history, with about 1.4 million people fleeing the island after the government was toppled there. And, as many people know, the it caused a lot of distrust and antagonism between the U.S. and Cuba in those years following. And, I know Obama, sort of helped to thaw some of those relations, but, we'll see what happens with the Biden administration here. But yeah, I mean, so what happened in the years following after your father got out of Cuba? What happened to you, your father, I guess, and your family?
Suffice it to say that my father did not go back. Again, following what you were saying, and again, and just so many people's stories right around that time. But yeah, it's sort of the door that just opened nice and wide for him for the rest of his life and our life. So in Honduras, Honduras, again, just a beautiful country, also with its own issues, unfortunately, but, beautiful country, beautiful people. This school, El Zamorano, as I mentioned, is renowned. It's a tremendous legacy in Latin America. Agriculture ministers that have studied there, and sort of great leaders in the world of agriculture and developing economies. And my father just made his way there, by himself, leaving Cuba, leaving everything behind. Once he got there, he realized sort of what was happening. And the other just amazing aspect of this is, he was curious about why there was this push of him particularly coming there. He learned that there was only 3 other Cuban students, and really students from all over Latin America. It turns out that there was almost 1,000 candidates for those positions, of which less than 100 were accepted. And my father was at the number 2 spot out of all of those students. Yeah.
That's incredible.
So, and it just kind of speaks to his dedication, and really without reference, without knowing, he just sort of, he's like, okay, well, this is what I have to do. Then let me go do this. Right. And really that embracing of opportunities, which is the common thread that really started then or even before and carries through in my family, and certainly to me, is this tremendous appreciation for opportunities and what you make of them. And it's it's a beautiful appreciation of a way to live your life. So he studied in Honduras and met my mom there. So my mom is from Honduras. My mom's family was very connected and very involved with El Zamorano. Uncles that went there, formed their careers as well. It's a great sort of network of like-minded individuals. So at that point he learned, and he was in school there for about 3 years in Honduras. And like I mentioned, he left Cuba. I believe I mentioned my father actually ended up leaving Cuba in April 1959, and then spent 3 years in Honduras at this school. And the next door was another opportunity for a scholarship to study at the University of Florida. So then that brings us to the U.S. So as soon as my father learned of this, that there were going to be the top 2 students from the whole class were going to be offered these particular scholarships or programs of study. I don't recall exactly what it was. And that he, I believe, had the choice between University of Florida and Cornell University, which to my father, this was just like, putting him in another planet, truly, and something that he could have never even really imagined to be in his future. As things went sort of, south in Cuba, to put it lightly, he was also, apart from his parents, apart from his family. This was really starting to weigh on him personally. He married my mom. My mom, obviously, he didn't have his family there. But yeah, married my mom in Honduras, and he ends up getting the scholarship to come to the U.S. And that's what he did. So
you were born in the U.S., right?
I wasn't.
Oh, okay.
So the other part from talk about struggle and opportunity is, so then my father finds himself in North Florida in the early 60s as an Afro-Cuban man. And, now he's in the U.S. in the, early to mid 60s in pretty much the American South, which is what North Florida is considered, not in Miami, not where sort of this Cuban influx was, I mean, there was a lot of tensions there as well. But again, here it was more about, his skin color.
A very different culture. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So he ends up getting his PhD at the University of Florida. And so, all of this in the span of a few short years. And again, in terms of opportunity and everything that he did. So his career was really focused on agriculture development in Latin America. And so he traveled a lot. He's worked in California, he worked in Panama, worked in Colombia, worked in Ecuador, and always with U.S. interests. So always on sort of contract or on U.S. interest side. And he applied for his citizenship, soon after graduation, and was an American citizen by that time. And so we traveled and we grew up in Latin America and South America pretty much my childhood. I was born in Ecuador because my father happened to be working there at the time, and lived most of my childhood actually in Cali, Colombia. And from the time that I could speak, from the time that I have any awareness, we spoke English and Spanish. I went to bilingual schools all my life. I didn't know any different. We would travel to the US. It was just all about exposure, us being able to do the things that my father wasn't able to do, and probably even didn't even think about it in terms of missing anything or lacking anything. It just wasn't part of the reality at all for him.
Yeah. Well, Sylvia, I wanted to, get a chance to talk about your life and your experiences. And so how did you I know all these values that your father instilled in you kind of led you into a career in financial planning. Can you tell us about that journey? How did you get to your career and where you are today?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that it led me directly to finance, but it led me to the road of exploration about my own interests and what I truly wanted to I guess do or learn about or live my life around in terms of my career. I'm one of 3 sisters, and we all have very different careers. My younger sister is actually a physician. My older sister she's a managing director with her business. All 3, successful in our own realm, but very different. So, my father and my parents, really, they never sort of sat us down and said, you have to do this, you have to study this, you have to study that. They just wanted to make sure that estábamos bien, that we were doing well, that we were in school. My father, some of the times that I can remember that he was sort of the most interested and the most, present and involved was anything to do with school and how we were doing and what do you like and, where do you want to go sort of thing, but never imposing sort of his own ideas on it. It was just, he just wanted to kind of hear from us, what that was all about. It was truly, it gave him a lot of joy. So I went to business school, and, for all these beautiful things and obviously there were some not so beautiful things as well. I wasn't all perfect for sure, but for all the values that I've taken from my father, I really had zero awareness of personal finance, financial markets, that there was this thing called the stock market, like none, pretty much, but really much until I took like an economics course in high school. It's like, oh, what are all these things? What are they talking about? It just really was fascinated. I just loved it. I went to business school, but even in business school, and this was the early 90s. So even in business school, I didn't have this sense of like, oh, I can study finance and I can go do this. I just was like, what? I don't know what I want to do, but I kind of like this. Had a lot of fun in college as well. So I didn't have that sort of like clear picture. In business school, I do remember that there were a couple of what we call, weed out classes. Like everyone was, scared of these classes of like, oh my gosh, you're going to not do well and they're crazy, whatever. And those were pretty much like the accounting classes and the finance class. yeah, and accounting, it was not fun, but I sort of appreciated the order and the analysis of it. Like, I got it. And then finance, I left till my senior year because, it was like, oh my gosh, it's hard, blah, blah, blah. You get all these messages from your environment. And I left it for my senior year, and I loved that class, and I loved what I learned. And it just opened a whole new world for me. And so personal finance is actually my second career. From college, I worked for a major retailer, and ended up moving up through the ranks through the finance area there, thanks to really great mentors, people that I trusted, and just had took an interest in my development. I remember one position that I was going into, which was sort of my entryway into the finance world. One of the regional directors, which knew of me and I knew of her, but I was sort of like, to me, she was this like intimidating, senior manager person. She like called me into the office and just sort of sitting very casually, like in the lobby area. She's like, well, tell me why you want to do this job. Like, just sat next to me, looked me right in the eye. She's like, tell me why you want to do this job. And I told her. And she looked at me and she goes, you're going to have to be tougher. I was like taken back, like, what is that? So anyway, it's very cool. I still remember that. She's great. Great woman. But it's just interesting. So ended up more being in sort of like a corporate finance position. But the role was sort of a liaison role between. So I worked under the CFO, sort of in a CFO area department. But I was tasked with a region, and so I had a lot of conversation and dialogue and interaction and responsibility, quite honestly, dealing with sort of store managers, senior managers, and this is like, again, large retailer, people that again, to me, like, oh my gosh, like they know everything, right? I know nothing, and these people know everything, and who am I to tell them anything? But that's around the time where I started to learn about, well, what are my skills? What do I excel at? And what do I love doing? And one of the mentors during that time, and I would get this feedback sort of often, is that even though I was dealing with, a lot of huge numbers and, spreadsheets upon spreadsheets upon spreadsheets, it would be one of those things where you're in a meeting room and, sort of a board meeting or somewhere, you just sort of get called on for, random numbers or input, and you just got to have like the answer, right? So they don't care about the million numbers. They care about the two numbers that make sense for whether a decision happens or not. And the feedback that I received is that, people just opened up to me. So I kind of learned this thing of hearing people out, of listening to people's perspectives and understanding sort of where they were coming from. But then at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers, and, how do we make it fit within the confines of what we've got going on, which is, of course, what I do with clients every day with financial planning. Yeah,
that's central to financial planning skills. Yeah.
And the other piece of this was, of course, now I'm with a major corporation. I have a 401k. I'm going to like every education session. I'm reading like every piece of mail that comes to my house about my 401k. I think it's like this magical thing where I'm contributing money and my company's matching. And I was just like, this is amazing. And, I'd go to like lunch with my friends or coffee, and it's like, let's talk about our 401k. I just had this excitement about it. And people would look at me like I was just nuts. Like, what are you talking about? I don't understand that. I'm not in it. It's a waste of money. You can't even get it. I'm like, that's the point. You can't get it. You got, oh my gosh. And so, it's like this total whatever, like just fun, imagine like you're going to lunch, fun lunch or whatever. And, here I am talking about like our investment options inside our 401k. But the thing that taught me, as well as other conversations, is how unfortunately unique, at least for my circle, it was for me to have that passion and interest around that material. Yeah. And the fact that other people didn't. So it was this revelation that here I have something that is essential in my mind, clearly, obviously, to this day, for people's futures and decision making, and them really back to my father's legacy of really just being in the driver's seat of of what they've got going on, right? It's like, no, you're not supposed to ignore this. This is important. And it's an opportunity that you have, to save and invest and take advantage of this match. So it was those two things combined of like, wow, I love this, and wow, other people don't, and they should.
Yeah.
And
it seems like a sign.
Yeah. So, but even then, I was like, oh, I went back to school and got my master's in finance. To me, I thought that the only roles that people did with this sort of thing was like portfolio management, and I had this vision of like, you have to do it in a pinstripe suit in New York, right?
Right.
In like on Wall Street. There was like nothing sort of different than that I could think up in my head. Certainly not any women that I was. Yeah. I mean, not that there weren't any, but that's not an image at all that came. It was a bunch of ties in the room. Like if I was sort of think about like what that career would be. And it's not that it intimidated me, but it didn't resonate with me. I didn't have any connection to it. So fast forward, I'm sort of rising in the career there, taking on opportunities and, climbing the corporate ladder as you do. And then something that struck me, and then of course this is now 2008. So talk about, historical events sort of having these effects, which of course they do for all of us. But yeah, so in 2008, we've got this, tremendous event that impacts a lot of people's retirements. You hear these horror stories. And, here I have this academic knowledge about asset allocation and time horizons and, all these academic things that I held to be true that were tools. And, and it's like, oh no, they lost all this money because people were either too aggressively invested or worse, didn't understand what they were invested in. I thought this was just, it's tragic. It's that aspect of it to me. Certainly there was a lot that people were not able to control, as we know. But to the extent that people did have advisors or had portfolios or had investments, there was some people that at least sort of made adjustments and other people didn't. And to me, it was like, well, I don't know. You can't make judgments on what people did and didn't do. But the moral of that story is, I just had this disconnect between how can I have all this knowledge? Like, how can I sort of study these things and know them and then just keep them and not share them? And the other aspect that came up around that time was just I think entrepreneurial spirit started to awaken within the corporate environment, meaning that I just felt this sense of like, okay, I'm no longer that excited about like the promotion, right? Where do I go from here? Yeah. And the term that I use for that around the time and even now is that I had a sense that I wanted to own my skill. I wanted to own my own development, be truly responsible for what I did with my talents and who I did them with, or who I shared them with, I guess. And it all roads pointed to, financial planning. I attended a financial planning conference around that time. I actually took my dad. He was fascinated. I make a joke that, I think till the day that my dad passed away, he really didn't know the difference between a stock and a bond pretty much. But he was just, he loved it. I loved it so much. And that was it. That's it for all of us. When you talk to any of us, it's like, no, he can't talk to you about what we do, but he loves that we love it and that we're. So lots of little sort of twists and turns. I relocated, and at that time just took a leap of faith and said, you know what, this is the time. I had saved, right? The financial planner in me, right? I had saved some money. Obviously there was the turmoil from the 2008 debacle, and actually my position, I was at a crossroads with the company in terms of whether I wanted to stay or relocate to New York with the organization. And explore options there. Plenty of people did. But again, I just didn't want that decision to be made for me. And I felt like, I'm not comfortable with this, So anyhow, I relocated took that leap of faith and then just sought out sort of, how do I do this? How do people become financial planners? Like, how does this happen? I attended conferences, I spoke to people, great conversations, and I ended up at a boutique financial planning firm for about a year and a half. I did have in mind that I did want to do financial planning. I wanted to focus on a comprehensive basis. I didn't want to purely work with investment analysis, and that it was very important that I work directly with clients. And so I knew that I had the academic knowledge, but what I didn't have was the experience of just sitting across the table from a client. And, every client is a universe. I can sit here and talk about what's quote unquote, right for them to do. But at the end of the day, how does it work for them? And the right way to approach something is not my way or their way. It's sort of me shedding light on what the options are, what the risks are, what avenues match up with the client's goals, concerns. And then truly, I believe in my philosophy with financial planning is that I think that the solutions sort of appear through the exploration of the individual, the resources, and then sort of just match those up against, what's out there in terms of financial tools.
Yeah.
So I did have in mind that I wanted to, work with financial planning and needed that experience of client facing experience. So I started at a small financial planning firm that gave me the opportunity. They supported my licensing, and I was there for about a year and a half. I appreciate them for what they did for me, which was get me from the ground to the second or third floor pretty much. And I needed help with that. And however, it was not a fit culturally whatsoever. And for a while, I just thought it was kind of like, that's the way it was. I was like, okay, well, this is just how I'm going to feel being a financial planner because, all these people, I don't know. I thought it was, I didn't see it as I just thought I just had to figure it out. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, of course I feel uncomfortable. Everyone's different than me. Culturally, I'm sort of putting on the face a lot of the days with people. I was very passionate about working in the Hispanic community. I was very involved with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and just so it was kind of the budding of me really taking my differences, I guess, and just sort of having them out there of this is who I am. Yeah. But because of the career change, I just thought that me feeling that way was normal and that it was just something that I had to work through until it was just suffocating. I felt like I was just not, I'm like, I can't do this because I can't shine. I can't be me. I can't even, use my full voice. And that is what led me to the opportunity with Prudential Advisors. I was actually introduced by the executive director of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, introduced me to a hiring manager with Prudential Advisors, which was very dedicated with the organization and, sort of was wanting to round out his team with, women, very diverse team. And I kind of went a little bit kicking and screaming, but I did. And next year I will celebrate my decade anniversary with the Prudential Advisors. Thank you, organization. And it's just been a journey of me learning to be me and me embracing myself and the moments of discomfort and kind of working through them, but then also never losing sight of my community, of my talents, and my particular, and using, my cultural competency is an asset. It has shaped my practice in what I do. I'm very involved with financial education in the Hispanic community. I get into a lot of personal conversation with families, and it just gives me the greatest joy. I mean, certainly I have a very diverse practice. I have clients really from all backgrounds, a financial planning based practice, also manage investments. But my brand, I guess, if you will, is Silvia Tergas, financial planner, bilingual, Latina, all of it.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, well, we're just about out of time, Sylvia. I wish, we could talk about this all day, but I think just the point that you're making here about really embracing your differences and putting, what defines you and who you are and putting that at the forefront, that's what financial planning, should be about. And, because those are the most genuine people and the people that are going to, just be able to relate to other people, I guess. And so I really applaud you for that, and thank you so much for being on the podcast and just opening up about your life experiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
And so if you'd like to reach out to Silvia Tergas or you have questions for her, you can reach her at sylvia.tergas@prudential.com, and we'll put this information in the show notes below as well. If you yourself have a struggle and you wish to share your experiences and help others in similar situations, please feel free to reach out to me at transparencywithdianab@gmail.com. I'd like to thank you for listening to Transparency with Diana B. If you've not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This is Diana Britton reminding you that where there's healing, there is hope. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Transparency with Diana B podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of wealthmanagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice. Always seek the advice of your healthcare provider with any questions you have regarding your particular situation.